so much for joining us for our first ever virtual board cafe. We specifically have designated this board cafe to give us the opportunity to talk a little bit about the financial outlook of the district and the major decisions that are on the docket for us as the trustees of the district and us as a collective community, truly. I am Anya Tanya Vudi. I am president of the District 65 Board of Education. And here with me is also Joey Halpern, who's a board member as well as chair of our finance committee. And before we jump into the content of our conversation, we wanted to provide some general overview to make sure that we're all operating with the same information about the current financial state as well as the decision making that is ahead of us. And in order to do this in a manner that allows for everyone to be heard, but also to be mindful of some of the abuse that has occurred in our community recently of virtual spaces, we have some kind of expectations that we're going to ask that we all operate with, as well as some security measures that we've had to choose to engage in. So we're asking everyone to leave their cameras off, to refrain from renaming themselves, so to make everyone participating identity clear. And we're asking that folks not unmute themselves to participate, but that if there are questions, we don't want to restrict questions and participation. So anything that is in the chat will go directly to our board secretary. So if you have Adila Qureshi, so if you have any questions along the way, or if you want to participate in the discussion, you can go ahead and do a chat directly to Adila. And if anyone is not able to chat for whatever reason, you can give Adila a call to make your desire to get unmuted and participate known. And you can call Adila at 847-859-8111. Again, 847-859-8111. So Adila, could you go ahead? Thanks, Adila.
Yes, and Anya, we also have Manuel Alaman here to translate if we need a translation.
Into Spanish.
Into Spanish, correct. Okay.
Thank you. And Joy, did you have any personal introduction that you wanted to make further than that as we launch the presentation?
I just wanted to thank everybody for being here, and this is a forum for us to share and obviously listen to you, but this is not the only space for that. So if you have follow-up questions from today, Anya and I can leave our emails in the chat, but you can also access our emails through the District 65 website. We have email addresses there that you can direct follow-up questions to as well.
Yes, and you can also email the entire school board by emailing schoolboard@district65.net. So we're going to do a quick slideshow to bring us up to speed. We'll ensure that the slideshow doesn't go longer than 10 minutes, and then we will make sure we have a full hour to reflect and ask questions and discuss the content. So yeah, really quick, we're gonna go over we're asking that we use our courageous conversations for agreements. So these are the community norms that we're looking to stay engaged, experience discomfort, speak your truth, and speak from the I position. expect and accept non-closure. We hope to get to all inquiries and provide all the information, but it is likely that we will not get to an exhaustive completion of the conversation. And that's why we are providing our email addresses and have other means of communication to continue to stay engaged, including a board cafe this Saturday in Spanish that will have English translation for any participants that want to engage there as well. Okay, next slide.
Just a minute.
So we want to start off and give you all the proper context for the current financial state of the district. This slide here shows the cause of the structural deficit that we are looking to resolve. The green line represents expenditures. The red line here represents our pre-COVID projected revenues. And as you can see, the expenditures structurally rise at a greater rate than the revenues rise. And because structurally those projected expenditures rise at a greater rate than the revenue, that is the cause of the structural deficit. COVID has exacerbated the structural deficit, and you can see that with the blue line. The blue line is the post-COVID projected revenues, and that has been impacted by the loss of local fees, the loss of some state contributions as a result of less sales tax and income tax coming into at the state level. This structural deficit has existed for decades. It was mitigated at different times in our district's history by the sale of bonds and by state contributions that were higher at other times than they are currently to local school districts. Our school district ran out of debt service in 2016. And when the debt service ran out in 2016 as a result of the use of bonds previously to purchase technology and to make capital improvements that did not have a long-term fiscal sustainability plan associated with them. And some of those were actually a part of the 2012 Fifth Ward referendum. And even though the Fifth Ward referendum was not able to pass to build a Fifth Ward school, some of the other projects that were included in that capital referendum were still proceeded with. And because they were proceeded with without a long-term fiscal plan, our school district ended up running out of debt service, which is essentially a credit card balance. So we were no longer able to use our debt service in order to make capital decisions for our district. And we also had a very low reserve. And that is why in 2017, we had a campaign for an operational referendum. The operational referendum set aside monies that were going to be taxed and specifically designated for operational expenditures over the course of 8 years. That operational referendum was designed to allow us to put money back into our reserves, as well as make some do some capital projects which involve safe entryways at schools, and to maintain the instructional operations of the district with a lens of equity and building our capacity to provide more equitable educational outcomes. So that is the reason why we have the structural deficit and the solutions that we have put into place. That 2017 referendum was meant to hold us over until just about right now where we are, so that we could then make the decisions to rectify the structural deficit over time and with the engagement of our community, rather than making unilateral decisions at the board level. So thank you, Adila. I think next slide, we're gonna turn it over to Joey.
Sorry, so in this slide, it shows you the recent past fiscal picture. You can see at the top line there, the operating revenues coming in above the operating expenditures. Something that the community members should all know and understand is that our revenues are have a false positive in terms of their spike, in part because those include the referendum dollars that are coming in. And as we go through these slides, if I go a little fast or if Anya goes a little fast, this will be posted in the chat for you all to access later as well. When you look at the that middle blue bar, the revenues minus expenditures, you can see the dollar amounts there. We were charged as a board with putting $1,000 a year into the fund balance, or sorry, $1 million a year into the fund balance, $1 million a year into capital projects, and putting the rest into a reserve. And the reserve was to help set aside future deficits. That was all a part of the original plan when the referendum was proposed. It was to bring in money to provide the board at the time a certain amount of years to help correct the fiscal problems that we're facing now. What we as a board are trying to do is to make sure that we continue to use the referendum dollars as we're promised, which we have to this point, and B, make sure that we meet the timeline that's necessary, because we have no desire or interest in coming back to the community for a referendum, another operating referendum. That is not good stewardship of tax dollars, and we need to make sure that the ship is running as efficiently as possible. Can we go to the next slide, Adila? During the last few years, though, the district has improved its financial position by restoring the fund balance. Again, that is a false positive. We're doing that with referendum dollars. That allows us to get a better rating for bonds. That allows us to get better financing options all aboard. And so it is certainly providing a benefit to us in terms of refinancing some of our long-term debt. That's certainly at this point in the economy. And we have been able to keep our promises to the community in terms of building up the referendum reserves so that we can use them in these upcoming years, the out years, while we make some decisions about how to right the ship fiscally. Another thing, that last bullet there, which Anya mentioned, moving technology purchases and some building capital projects to the operating budget was a big move. It was something that needed to be done, and it better aligns some of the spending out of some of the budgets that we have than where we were spending from before. Just a little bit smarter long term. Can we go to the next slide? Thank you. Understanding the revenues right now. So one of the reasons why the structural deficit persists is because local property taxes account for almost 80% of our revenues. And we're limited to levying those taxes to the community to the point of CPI or 5%, whichever is less. We do have a great return. You know, our community pays their tax bills, so the money does come in. We have a great percentage of people who take care of that bill, which we're grateful for. But that obviously limits the amount of money that comes into the district in terms of a growth metric. And state funding of public education has been reduced. It has not been fulfilled to 100% of what the statutes have been asked over the past years. And based on calls the past couple of weeks with some of our government officials, it appears that it's going to continue to not be funded fully. And those are things we have to plan for. At the same time, we have to understand that we are constantly in a state of the possibility of property tax freezes and things like that. All of that directly impacts the school budget. Go to slide 7.
So this slide essentially shows the way CPI, the metric that Joey just referenced, which is a limiting factor in the amount of revenue we're able to acquisition through levy, how that has changed over time. And you can see that it rises and falls depending on the health of the economy. But this is the limiting factor of how much our revenues can grow in any given year based on the amount of revenues that we get through taxes. And you can see the average over the last 10 years was 1.76.
The deficit we face here is not new. It's something that is longstanding, and it is something that has been mitigated over the years through different means. Here's a list of some things that have just been tended to over time, some non-instructional and some instructional changes that have been made. Again, when you look at that first bullet under instructional, you see instructional staff reductions. That's something that decisions get made. It's very common in schools for reductions to happen, and then class environments change and new hires happen. And when you go and look at the history of some of these things, you'll see an ebb and flow. What we're looking for as we make structural changes to our spending is we're looking at waste. We're looking at things that can be cut and not be missed. We're also looking to protect the classroom environment. And it always hurts when you see a list there that says things like reading specialist reductions and substitute teaching reductions. Those are all things that touch classrooms in terms of coverage and personal relationships. But there is always more specifics in the budget. I believe it's the October finance meeting is where we post our budget book that has hundreds of pages of information about our budget, and you can reference it on there or email me and I'll send you a direct link to it for more detailed information about our budget.
And folks could also email Raphael Olafemi,
Yes,
our
they can.
Chief Financial Officer.
But all of this is to lead to what are we going to do to right the ship here?
So this slide represents the numbers based on which we need to make some important decisions. You can see listed along the top is the fiscal year, and that starts with next school year, 2021-2022. We have operating revenues in the next highest row, operating expenditures in the second row, and revenues minus expenditures, which lets us see where there is a deficit or a surplus that we need to prepare for. And these are all based on projections of what the CPI will be, based on projections of what our salary commitments will cost based on the bargain contracts that we currently have. So based on these projections, we have the revenue minus expenditures, which shows us that there's a deficit that needs to be planned for in 2021 through 2025. And then the next row, the annual reductions needed to eliminate the structural deficit. So the operational referendum in 2017 was meant to allow some breathing room for these reductions to be made. The time has come for us to make these difficult decisions based on the deficit that we've inherited. And those are the types of reductions that we will need to make starting next year. The goal is that in making those reductions, we will eliminate the risk of having those numbers in red be a deficit. What we want is a balanced budget, and we also want preparation for having a not having to make reductions in perpetuity. So what you'll see is in year one, starting next year, we'll need to reduce $2,052,111 in expenditures. We're going to be doing these reductions in phases. And so in just a moment, Joey's going to walk us through what those phases, what we propose those phases will look like. And so you'll see we're talking about phase one this year. Next year will be phase two. And in 2022 through 2025, we will be taking care of the phase three reductions. Those will be the major structural shifts that we need to make as a district and as a community in order to ensure that in 2025 and 2026, we are fiscally sound. And then you see at the bottom the net revenues and expenditures. And so starting in 2023, based on this,